Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. Sharon Scambry, and I'm here today to talk about business communication. In the weeks that follow, we're going to work through each chapter of the Rents and Lents text published by McGraw-Hill. So let's get started today with chapter 1, and we are looking at the importance of business communication in the workplace. Business communication as a problem-solving endeavor. Okay, so we have 9 learning objectives for this chapter. 1, we want to be able to explain the importance of skillful communication to an employer. We want to be able to explain the ways in which communication in the workplace is a form of problem solving. We want to describe the communication skills that are needed in the contemporary workplace and define professionalism in that context. We're going to look at the 3 main categories of business communication. We're going to look at how organizational structure and organizational culture impact internal communication. And we're going to describe the context for each act of communication in the workplace and look at the steps involved in a problem-solving approach to business communication. So let's start with, what is the role of communication in business? Well, the role is that it's the number 1 skill in demand by employers. Hiring managers and business executives. So we need to be able to confidently put communication as a held skill on our resume, and we need to be able to demonstrate that we are good at oral communication skills, written communication skills, and interpersonal communication skills, because 1 in 5 projects has been documented as unsuccessful because of ineffective communication, according to the Project Management Institute and their report put out in 2013. So when a customer complains, what do you do with that? You know, especially if they're upset, it's difficult to know in the moment exactly how to respond. And what format do you respond? Do you respond in person? Do you have to give a written response? And when do you respond? Do you respond right there and then? Or do you go away and try and figure out what to do? What tone should be used and what should you say? Well, when a customer is upset and right there in front of you, first of all, you want to let them know that you are hearing what they are saying. So validate their complaint, validate their feelings and their issue, and then let them know that you are going to do your best within whatever authority you have to make sure that the issue is addressed. So in this way, you're beginning to take steps towards this problem-solving approach. This here is the graphic from Rents and Lents of Exhibit 1.5, and this graphic captures the business communication process, right? So we have 2 communicators in this conversation, and communicator 1, as in person 1, recognizes that there is a need to communicate whatever message. That person defines the problem, searches for possible solutions, selects a course of action, and then composes the message and delivers the message. So here's the message going from person 1 through to person 2 in the chosen medium by person 1. Person 2, or communicator 2 on this graphic, receives that message, interprets that message, decides on a response, and may respond with a message if they so choose. So here's communicator number 2, and they are providing communicator number 1 with their response in the chosen medium. And so, you know, this looks pretty simple, but it can be kind of tricky, right? And so whether you're communicator number 1 sending the message, or communicator number 2 receiving the message, you need to be aware of each of these 10 steps, especially, well, ideally to avoid miscommunication, but if a miscommunication happens, then these 10 steps help you to figure out, well, where did the miscommunication happen, and therefore better equipped to address the miscommunication. So there's 2 types of communication problems, right? One, problems that are well-defined and problems that are not well-defined. A problem that is well-defined, we can flowchart it easily. We can arrive at a correct answer. And examples of well-defined problems is when a message is put into a written letter, formal format, or when you are filling in a form to report how much money you have left in the budget, right? So these are well-defined problems and easily delineated. Whereas a not well-defined problem, an ill-defined problem, is a problem where the measurable factors are unclear. You know, what is the direct measures, or even indirect measures that are relevant to this problem. So maybe that's not clear. Similarly, the outcomes are unpredictable. So examples of ill-defined problems is keeping a customer's goodwill while rejecting their refund request. You know, that doesn't actually work, does it? You can't keep their trust and goodwill when you're telling them to go away and you're not going to solve the problem. You're not going to give the refund. Similarly, another example is persuading your boss to pay for you to attend a professional meeting. You can better define that problem, and you can formalize that problem. You can identify key factors that will be impacted and measurable for that problem, and you can anticipate the outcome. And in that way, you might have, you know, in better defining that problem of persuading your boss to fund your attendance at a professional meeting, you are more likely to actually solve the problem. So in other words, what we're saying here is that taking a problem-solving approach to business communications, you need to start with research, do your homework, do some analysis, think through what are the potential measures, what are the potential outcomes, what is the best medium, how best to coach this message that you want to send, and then make the decision and send the message. Okay. So let's assume that you work at a startup where 2 employees have reported sexual harassment, but there's no formal policy in place. Now, it just so happens that you're the director of human resources, and so you need to announce this new sexual harassment policy. So what do you think is the best medium for this message to be sent out? Email, memo, presentation, workshop, or a combination of some of these options? So have a think about that and see what you come up with. This graphic is exhibit 1.6 on page 21 of Rents and Lengths. And this is this graphic is capturing the problem-solving approach to communication. So essentially, you want to define the problem, generate some options, evaluate those options, build the solution, and deliver the solution. So in other words, communication that is solution-oriented is recommended as effective communication. Okay, so here we've got an executive in New York working for the same organization for an extended period of time. And we've also got a designer from India who just graduated. And these two people are assigned to the same team to develop an online marketing campaign. What fun. So what communication skills will they need to work together well? And what kinds of literacy may present challenges for them? All right, so I'm not going to give you the answer to these questions, but leave them as open-ended questions for you to think about and make a decision as to what you think the skills that are needed are and what types of literacy. I'll leave that with you. Okay, so in terms of the communication skills that are available to us, we can talk about verbal literacy, we can talk about visual literacy, we can talk about analytics, analytical skills, we can talk about media literacy, how about cultural competency and ethical awareness. So for the question on this slide, some of the skills listed on this slide are relevant. Okay, so verbal literacy is about like vocabulary and the use of that vocabulary and how well you can articulate a particular point or not. Visual literacy is using visual images, visual aids to get the communication across. Maybe we need to bring in some numbers as facts and support for the argument that we're putting to communicator number two. Media literacy, understanding that not all information sources are as credible as others. So recognizing that media literacy is about understanding how credible is the information source that you are drawing from and putting forward in your message. Cultural competency is about understanding what and how and when to communicate with people from different cultures. And in this globalized world of business that we live in and communicate in every day, cultural competency is fast becoming an in-demand skill. And then ethical awareness too, you know, understanding where is the gray area, and when you walk into that gray space, what do you do? How do you cope effectively and continue your high standard of professionalism? So ethical awareness is flagged as a recipe for better business. Consumers want to know what values an organization stands for, and many consumers will make buying decisions based on how consistent organizational values are with the consumer's own personal values. So we need to we as astute future business leaders, we need to understand that the business world is now in an age of social accountability. Organizations need to be able to answer to the community with regards to ethics and ethical business behavior. So essentially, it comes down to trust, and trust is flagged as critical to the success of any business, but also effective communication. So with regards to organizations taking a stand on social issues such as minimum wage, climate change, LGBTQ issues, we see some organizations very much leaders in the space of corporate social responsibility. Patagonia is built on environmental justice activism, for example, and their efforts in this regard have been headlines since the 1970s. So Patagonia is an exemplar case for brand activism. Now, what do you think? Do you see Patagonia as an exemplar case for brand activism? Are you aware of the environmental activism undertaken by Patagonia historically and currently? What other forms of activism do you see Patagonia undertaking? Because there are other forms of activism that Patagonia is engaged in. And what other brands do you see engaging either in a corporate social responsibility strategy and or brand activism? Okay, so professionalism in the workplace goes beyond etiquette and social behavior. Professionalism is about respect and respectful communication. It's also about knowing where your loyalty lies and ensuring that your words and your conversations, your communication is reflective of that loyalty. Professionalism is also about work ethic and adaptability to the demands in the everyday work, in the workplace, adaptability and service. So service is about understanding that you are there to serve the organisation. You are there to serve other colleagues, other employees. You are there to serve customers and other stakeholders, for example. So service takes on a very broad comprehension. Jacqueline Whitmore, who is a business etiquette expert, suggests that manners are required to build positive relationships and enable a working environment to function favourably for all involved. Okay, so think of a time when you observed unprofessional behaviour. What was unprofessional about it and what damage did it do? Here is an email and the question is posed as to how professional is this email. Okay, so we're on a first name basis. Maybe these people, Susan and Noel, know each other well enough to be on a first name basis. Maybe the office environment is highly collegial and maybe that's okay. But if it's a first communication, then no, that's not okay. Let's see what the email is about. With the deadline at our doorstep. Okay, what deadline? When's the deadline? What's the deadline about? We are looking for your confirmation you are on it. It. What do you mean? On it. On it, that sounds like a bit of slang. That's not professional. We are looking for your confirmation. Okay. Might be better to ask formally. We request your confirmation. John reached out. Who's John? Where does John fit in the picture? John reached out via Chatter. Okay. Susan, are you on Chatter? Oh, and John sent an email an hour ago. Okay, that's a pretty fast follow-up 1 hour later, and you still haven't responded. Okay, maybe give Susan a little bit more time. Anyway, I'm going to let you go through the rest of that. So we have these 3 types of communications in the business environment. We have internal operational, we have external operational, and then we have personal. So internal operation is, for example, Susan, John, and Noel working together on a team to meet a deadline, right? That's internal operational. External operational is work-related communication that the organisation does with people and groups that exist outside of the organisation. So when we're communicating with suppliers, when we, and I mean the organisation or the people in the organisation, are communicating with customers or other stakeholders, like, for example, local government. Personal communication. This is interpersonal communication, but it occurs in the workplace, right? So maybe two colleagues become friends, they have lunch regularly, and they email back and forth all day long. Maybe they are sending messages, text messages to each other as well. Maybe they're in a virtual meeting and they're sending direct messages to each other. Just know that if that script is printed out, then those private messages, those personal messages are also printed out. Some people have been caught out with that. Alrighty. So internal operational communication. How would you describe the style of interoperational communication in your organization? Each organization has, their own style, their own organizational culture, which impacts these internal communications, internal processes. External operational communication. This is when we're communicating with customers, for example, or maybe core business partners like suppliers I mentioned, maybe the local government or the public at large, maybe our partners that we have strategic alliances with, maybe some other community groups. So when it comes down to personal communication, there is the question as to what's appropriate and what's not. And maybe you can think of an example from your own experience that might have been considered inappropriate. Organizational structure. Two basic forms of organizational structure are organic or flat. These structures, these different structures, have an impact with regards to the patterns of work and the level of authority that's held in the ranks, how responsibility and authority, how what you are authorized to do is decided and allocated, how your responsibilities are allocated, what are the lines of communication. If you're an entry-level employee, is it easy for you to talk to your line supervisor? Is it easy and readily accessible for you as the entry-level employee to talk to the executive managers? And what about the CEO? Is there a line of communication between the lower and the higher ranks? Or have the ranks been flattened out? Has the hierarchy been flattened out so that it's more of an egalitarian structure? These structural decisions that are probably outside of the control of any employee, any in particular employee, it has impacts for how, it has consequences for what and how communication takes place in the organization. Similarly, for culture, what's the purpose of the organization? In the case of Patagonia, yes, they are a high-end outdoor clothing manufacturer and brand, but they pitch their purpose as environmental justice. Their customers or clients that they serve they very much are in contact with, are communicating with, both online and offline, because they see these customers as an important stakeholder whose needs need to be taken into account. The size and structure, Patagonia is a very large organization, and in terms of structure, it does have a traditional hierarchical structure. geographic or physical activities. You know, in the COVID context, Patagonia they invited their employees to work at home and be paid. They shut down their retail and their distribution centers, and they went to, click and collect or online shopping only. And Patagonia also holds diversity as one of their organizational values. And so these organizational characteristics, these organizational values, the brand values of Patagonia has an impact on the way that the organization is managed and the way that communication takes place within that organization. So here we come back to this business communication process. And now we reconsider these 10 steps and these two communicators engaging in this communication process, keeping in mind that communicator 1 and communicator 2, they may well be engaging in an internal communication. They may be communicating as an external operational communication, or it may be interpersonal. Regardless, sending the message and receiving the message needs consideration to be effective. So the sensor senses a need to communicate, defines the situation, considers possible communication strategies, selects a course of action, composes the message and sends the message. And then the receiver receives the message, interprets the message, decides on a response and provides that response, and effectively becomes the new sender. So we can sum it up and suggest that a problem-solving approach in business communication is about defining the problem, generating the options, evaluating the options, building the solution, and delivering the solution. So these suggestions are put forward as strategies for you to become an effective business communicator. Essentially, the goal of business communication is to create a shared understanding. So this is what communicator 1 needs to check in with communicator 2. And similarly, when communicator 2 is sending their response back to communicator 1, they need to check in with each other. You know, are we on the same page here? Because that's how we effectively work together. So thank you very much for your attention. And that wraps up chapter 1. I'll look forward to seeing you again to cover chapter 2. Thanks then, bye.